Deuteronomy explicitly says, it has Moses say, this is not going to work so well for you. It's just not. So it's not going to work until God transforms your hearts. When he circumcises your hearts, then that's all going to work out. So good luck until then.
Do or do not. There is no try. You must unlearn what you have learned. You must unlearn what you have learned.
Most people think the New Testament replaces the Old. But according to Dr. Jason Staples, the gospel isn't a change of plans. It's the fulfillment of a promise. After all, didn't Jesus say he came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it? The Hebrew Bible is the testimony that Israel was a stiff-necked people who broke the covenant repeatedly, forsaking their God. As Deuteronomy 29 and 31 reveal, God knew they would forsake him, go whoring after other gods, and fall under the Torah's curse, first by exile and then by death. By the time of the prophets, the situation was catastrophic. Hosea reveals that the northern kingdom, Ephraim, was effectively divorced by God and declared Lo Ami, meaning not my people. Hosea pronounces judgment on them as a people who have been mixed and gentilized among the nations and declared dead in their identity. Ezekiel confirms this total demise. In his famous Vision of the Valley, he sees the house of Israel not just as a struggling nation, but as dry bones, dead and locked in the grave of the law's curse. They were a people awaiting a resurrection they couldn't achieve themselves. To understand how God fixes this, we must see what Paul saw in Romans chapter 8, verse 2. It says, "For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death." Paul identifies two Torah at work here. First, there is the Torah of the letter, the earthly, attenuated version revealed through Moses. Because of human weakness, it was added because of transgressions, till the seed, which is Christ, should come. This became the Torah of sin and death. But Paul also speaks of the Torah of the Spirit of life, the heavenly, eternal Torah. This is the Torah of fidelity, of faith, that he speaks of in Romans chapter 3, verse 27. It says, "Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of fidelity." This was always the goal of Torah. However, there was a grim reality. All humanity was imprisoned under the sentence of death, unable to gain the victory due to the paradox of justification. A person cannot become just by the works of the Torah. Why? You cannot become just by the works of the Torah because the Torah requires you to already be just, to do what it demands, and sin had already entered the world. As Paul explains in Galatians 3:12, the Torah is not from fidelity. It is a consequence of infidelity. It was a guardian for a people who lack the Spirit. Therefore, the justness the Torah requires must come from a different source than the Torah itself. We were locked away, prisoners, captive to death, except for one person, the just one. Faith, defined as fidelity, is the golden thread woven through both the Old and New Testaments. Paul defines it as the obedience of faith. He bookends his entire message in Romans with this phrase, opening in Romans 1:5 and closing in Romans 16:26. Jesus, the one the apostles call the just one, provided the obedience of faith. By taking the curse upon himself, Jesus broke the paradox of justness and activated an escape clause, a divine loophole, if you will, veiled inside of the Torah, as we shall see. For Paul, the gospel isn't about mere mental agreement. It is about a loyal, lived-out obedience facilitated by the Spirit. Again, fidelity is the thread woven through both testaments. Jesus is the just one, the only man who kept the Torah perfectly. Concealed in the law is a divine loophole. Leviticus 18:5 promises, "Keep my statutes, which if a man do, he shall live in them." Jesus became that man, the only man who provided the perfect obedience of faith. Because he was already just, he did those things Torah commanded. His life of obedient faith as a man earned the right to live, freeing the prisoners. By taking the curse of Torah upon himself, he broke the paradox of justness and activated the escape clause. The law thus fulfilled, it was impossible for death to hold him. And so, while Israel failed and fell under the curse of death, the Torah promised life to the one individual who would actually do what the Torah required. This is what Jesus meant when he told the lawyer and the rich young ruler, "This do, and thou shalt live." He was pointing to the only way out of the death sentence. His resurrection proved the Torah of the Spirit had triumphed over the Torah of sin and death. Paul explains the mechanics of this in Romans 11:16. "If the root be holy, so are the branches." In the biblical world, when the common touches the holy, the common becomes holy. And so, when the Holy One, Jesus, touches death, he doesn't become defiled, he destroys death. As the holy root, he becomes a resurrecting force, pulling the dead branches of Israel into his own life and fidelity. For proof that this is the apostles' message, we look to the first sermons ever preached. Peter stands before the crowds and declares that while men killed the just one, it was physically and legally impossible for death to hold him. Why? Because as the only man to achieve the Torah of fidelity, the grave had no legal claim on him. Peter points to the Psalms, noting that God promised David that his Holy One would not see corruption. Since David's body did decay, Peter argues that David was looking forward to the resurrection of the Messiah. His message is clear. You crucified the holy and just one, but by doing so, you unknowingly triggered the very mechanism that fulfills the law. Years later, Paul stands in a synagogue in Antioch and echoes this exact apostolic witness of Peter, proving there was no Pauline departure from the original message. Paul explicitly ties the gospel to the promise made to the fathers. He argues that by raising Jesus, God fulfilled the sure mercies of David. Paul's logic is devastatingly simple. Because Jesus did not see decay, he is the only source of justification. Paul drops the bombshell when he says, "By him, everyone who believes is justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses." Note the distinction. The law of Moses could only condemn a stiff-necked people. But because the Just One satisfied the law's requirement for life, he now has the authority to share his justness with us. As the Holy Root, he becomes a resurrecting force, pulling the dead branches of Israel into his own life and fidelity. The apostles did not invent a new religion. They preached the exact fulfillment of the old one. Peter and Stephen both pointed to Jesus as the Just One. The prophet Moses promised in Deuteronomy 18, who would finally lead the people to true obedience. Paul testifies that he received this same message at his conversion from the mouth of Ananias, a man devout according to the law. Ananias told him, "The God of our fathers has chosen you to see that Just One and hear the voice of his mouth." They each recognized a hidden truth in the prophets, that the Just One lives by his fidelity, as foretold by Habakkuk. Having reached the Torah's ultimate goal, the risen Messiah stands as our human representative. He is no longer under the jurisdiction of the Torah's curse, because he has already satisfied its demands through death and resurrection. This is the turning point of history. Because Jesus is the Just One who lives, he now has the authority to dispense the spirit of fidelity to us. He doesn't abolish the law, he writes it directly onto our hearts, just as Jeremiah promised in the New Covenant. And so, the apostolic witness is unanimous. The Spirit doesn't make us law-free, the Spirit makes us lawful, enabling a brand of fidelity that the stone tablets alone could never produce. Paul's citations in Romans 10:5 and Galatians 3:12 do more than just confirm Leviticus 18:5. They highlight a theme recognized by the prophets. Both Nehemiah and Ezekiel repeatedly appeal to this principle as the sole mechanism for restoring an exiled and disobedient people. Paul's gospel isn't unique. It's what the Israelites had been expecting for centuries. The new covenant isn't law-free, and Paul isn't a Marcionite trying to sever the new from the old. Paul reframes righteousness through the Spirit, rather than external rituals. After all, what does Jeremiah say the new covenant is? "This shall be the covenant. I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts." If this is true, the gospel can hardly be called law-free, right? Here's a condensed, compressed summary of the gospel. When the Just One submitted to death and became a curse for us, he triggered the escape clause hidden in Leviticus 18:5. Because the Torah promises life to the person who does these things, and Jesus is the only one who did them perfectly, it was impossible for death to hold him. The Torah's curse of death is legally superseded by the life it promised to the one who remained faithful. As Paul explains in Romans 6 and 7, since, he that is dead is freed from sin, and the Torah has jurisdiction only as long as one lives. By dying, Jesus went beyond the jurisdiction of the law, and in rising, he became its master. He is no longer under the curse. He is the source of the life the law always aimed at. Now, having received his Spirit, we are rescued from this present evil age and brought into a new era of fidelity with Spirit-enabled obedience, as described in the New Covenant of Jeremiah. The gospel is presented as the fulfillment, not the abolition, of the Torah. Torah has reached its purpose. So what are the practical implications of this divine loophole? It forces us to reconsider the very mechanics of salvation. For centuries, many have viewed the cross through the lens of penal substitutionary atonement. The idea that God punished Jesus instead of us to satisfy a legal sin debt. But there's a massive problem. If Jesus truly fulfilled the law, he could not have been a substitute. Why? Because Deuteronomy 24:16 explicitly forbids it. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, nor shall children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. If the father were to pour out his wrath on an innocent son rather than the guilty, that wouldn't be justice. It would be a violation of the very Torah Jesus came to fulfill. The apostles never preach a gospel of divine child abuse. They preach a gospel of divine deliverance. Jesus didn't stand in our place to take a beating. He stood in the dead zone of the law to break the cage from the inside. He didn't bypass the law's requirement. He fulfilled the law's highest promise of life. This changes everything about how we see God. In the substitution model, you often have a divided Trinity, a vengeful Father demanding blood, and a merciful Son stepping in to stop him. But in Paul's gospel, the Trinity isn't at war with itself. There is no wrath-dumping here. Instead, we see the Father and Son in perfect harmony. The result isn't a legal transaction where a sin debt is paid. It's a holiness contagion. Because the just one is the root and you are the branch, his life becomes your life. You aren't declared just while remaining a rebel. You are made just by being grafted into the only human being who actually achieved the Torah of fidelity. The gospel isn't about an angry God being appeased. It's about a faithful God rescuing his people through the only human Torah to ever walk the earth. If the gospel isn't a law-free pass, then what is it? It is a call to total allegiance. We are no longer prisoners trying to follow a rule book we can't keep. We are participants in the life of the King who kept it for us. The divine loophole didn't just get you out of death, it got the Spirit into you. This means your life is now the canvas where the Torah is finally being written. Every act of justice, every moment of mercy, and every step of obedience is the Torah of the Spirit moving through you. You are living proof that the law has reached its purpose.